Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. National Guard troops hit Los Angeles streets as immigration protests enter a third day, sparking more arrests after at least 10 are detained on Sunday. Governor Gavin Newsom calls the deployment unlawful and urges President Trump to pull troops immediately. Ukraine says Russia fired a record 479 drones in a single night, calling it one of the largest aerial barrages of the war. Kiev claims it shot down 460 of the drones and 19 out of 20 missiles, as Moscow continues to reject ceasefire calls. Top US and Chinese officials meet in London to revive a Geneva Pact and cool escalating tensions over tariffs and export controls. With rare earths and supply chains at stake, the talks signal a critical push to stabilise global markets after months of trade turmoil. President Trump's new travel ban takes effect today, blocking entry from 12 countries, mostly in Africa and the Middle East, to protect national security. The order also imposes partial restrictions on 7 more countries, though exemptions apply for diplomats, athletes, and certain work visas. Tehran has slammed Israel's interception of a Gaza-bound aid vessel as piracy, saying the incident occurred in international waters. Iran's foreign ministry called the raid an assault on international activists and a violation of global law. NATO chief Mark Rutte is urging a 400% increase in air and missile defences, warning that Russia's air attacks in Ukraine show the need for stronger protection for NATO. He also says the North Atlantic Treaty Organization needs thousands more tanks and millions of artillery shells to meet modern threats. Tehran warns it will scale back cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog if an anti-Iran resolution is passed this week. The IAEA should not expect friendly cooperation, says an atomic energy spokesman ahead of Monday's board meeting. French President Emmanuel Macron kicked off the UN Ocean Summit in Nice, declaring that Greenland, Antarctica and the deep ocean are not for sale. He called for an international memorandum on deep-sea mining, saying it's a necessity to protect the planet. Now for our top story, we head to North America, where tensions rise as violent protests grip downtown Los Angeles. FBI Director Kash Patel has made it clear that the Bureau will enforce constitutional rights without needing anyone's permission. He pledged to restore law and order in Los Angeles, where protests have turned violent. The LAPD declared the downtown protests as unlawful and ordered crowds to disperse immediately, responding to blocked roads and safety concerns. This comes as President Donald Trump deployed the National Guard amid rising tensions over federal immigration raids. In a fiery statement, Trump warned of troops everywhere, saying they spit and we hit. The protests erupted after ICE agents arrested dozens of migrants, leading to clashes with federal officers. Demonstrators blocked highways and even set fire to self-driving cars, while tear gas and flashbangs filled the streets. On his social media platform, Truth Social, Trump called Los Angeles, quote, invaded by illegal aliens and criminals, and vowed to liberate the city. California Governor Gavin Newsom condemned the move, calling it a serious breach of state sovereignty. He formally demanded the troops be withdrawn. Democratic governors joined in, calling the deployment an alarming abuse of power. San Francisco Mayor Daniel Lurie also condemned these violent protest actions. He said peaceful voices are welcome, but violence won't be tolerated. Police arrested around 60 people after anti-ICE demonstrators turned destructive. Meanwhile, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass accused the Trump administration of provoking chaos, saying, "This isn't about public safety. This is about another agenda." We're now joined by anchor and correspondent Joshua Barnes to give us a bit more detail on this. Joshua, what have you got for us?
Well, yes, absolutely, Thomas. The situation currently playing out in Los Angeles is a tough one. A third day of scenes which are similar to those of riots have been taking place after, as you've mentioned, several arrests were undertaken around Trump's project on anti-immigration, undocumented migrants as well. This was a key part of Trump's policy, key part of his campaign before coming into power, and after being inaugurated as president for the second time, he promised to deport millions of people, millions of undocumented migrants, and this action that we've seen in Los Angeles is a continuation of that theme. Of course, upset within neighbourhoods, people who are part of communities being arrested while going about their everyday lives, and this has led to widespread protests. Images like the ones that we've been seeing over the past 3 days continuing to move forward. Trump talking about the difficulty of the situation ongoing, but a question's been raised as to whether his contribution towards troops and movement of guards is benefiting the situation or potentially leading to further escalations. There have been reports of instances where reporters, journalists, cameramen and women have been in these riots as they've been taking place and have been hit with these non-live fire, so it's bullets, and there have been injuries reported. The situation on the ground truly is difficult. Downtown LA is seen by many as a no-go zone. Local police have said that anybody out in those areas will be dealt with. It's an extremely difficult situation. Given the extremity of the situation, migration is a key topic, and LA is an area which is home to many migrants. A lot, of course, are there legitimately, but some aren't, and Trump's crackdown has clearly stirred up distrust amongst people and also discontent around the way in which it's being dealt with. We will, of course, here be keeping an eye on all of the developments as they happen.
Joshua Barnes, thank you very much for joining us. For our next story, we move over to Europe, and Russia has launched a record 479 drones at Ukraine in a massive overnight barrage, according to Kyiv's Air Force. The Ukrainian Air Force intercepted 460 of them, along with 19 out of 20 missiles. The strike comes as Moscow continues to reject calls for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Ukraine struck back with a rare long-range drone attack inside Russia, hitting an electronics plant in the Volga region of Chorvizia, over 1,300 kilometers from the border. 2 drones fell in the Vidnir facility, temporarily halting operations. However, no casualties were reported. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed it destroyed 49 Ukrainian drones over the past night, including 2 in Chorvizia. Another was found in a field near the regional capital of Cheboksary. In a separate incident, a drone strike damaged a gas pipeline in Russia's Zoronsk region. Now we turn to the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrives in court to continue his testifying in his long-running corruption trial amid intense political scrutiny. Meanwhile, Israeli forces have intercepted a Gaza-bound aid boat carrying activists carrying a small amount of aid, including climate campaigner Greta Thunberg. The British-flagged vessel named Madeleine was stopped overnight in international waters while attempting to break Israel's long-standing naval blockade of Gaza. Israeli officials confirmed they have taken control of the boat. All 12 crew members are reported safe. The yacht carried rice and baby formula as a symbolic form of aid, and Israel called the voyage a propaganda show in support of Hamas and proposed to deliver the remaining aid through official channels. The Freedom Flotilla coalition, which operated the vessel, says the mission was meant to highlight Gaza's humanitarian crisis. The Foreign Ministry confirmed that the yacht was redirected after entering a restricted zone and is now being towed to Israel. All passengers are safe and will be returned to their home countries. The activists shared pre-recorded messages with Thunberg saying they were kidnapped in international waters. Israel says the small amount of aid aboard will be sent to Gaza through established channels. The mission was meant to highlight the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where the UN warns of famine and disease amid the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has confirmed the death of senior Hamas commander Mohammed Sinwar. His body was recovered from a tunnel beneath the European hospital in Khan Yunis. He was killed in an airstrike on the 13th of May, and Sinwar was the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, the man behind the October the 7th attack on Israel. Both were killed in the same region. Known as the Shadow, he had long evaded capture until he was finally tracked and targeted. We're now joined by Jonathan Hoffman, who is a former Vice President of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom, and he is in London and joining us today. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us. I first of all briefly want to touch on Netanyahu's trial, which has just kicked off once again today, where he has to testify. This trial has been going on for 5 years, Jonathan, and the Prime Minister of Israel, he claims political persecution, but how credible is defence after 5 years of scrutiny?
The trial, in my view, is an attempt by the opponents of the Israeli Prime Minister to achieve through the courts what they failed to achieve through the ballot box. The charges against Netanyahu are flimsy. The evidence is not substantial, and I think this trial is really a waste of public money in Israel, and I don't see the verdict going against the Prime Minister. I think it's just a distraction, and a distraction at a time when his attention should really be fully focused on seeing the end of Hamas in Gaza and repelling the various attacks on Israel from the Houthi in Yemen, from Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think this is just really a terrible distraction from what he needs to be doing as Prime Minister.
Yes, and Jonathan, along with this, Netanyahu is obviously facing mass opposition from both internationally and domestically. We see visuals of thousands lining the streets in Tel Aviv, all protesting against the Prime Minister, and also obviously the return of the hostages and an end to the war. As the first sitting Israeli leader to testify, is Netanyahu muddying the image of Israel in any way in his terms, both in the war and domestically in regarding this case?
So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
So is Netanyahu, how do you think Netanyahu is portraying Israel on both the international stage and domestically?
Well, I think he's doing a good job. I mean, it's a job nobody would envy. I mean, he has to balance, on the one hand, freeing the hostages, and there are still some 30 plus hostages, including those not living, who have to be freed. He has to balance that against, on the other hand, freeing Israel from the terror of Hamas, and those two objectives often clash with each other. If the Israeli Defense Forces are too strong in trying to repel Hamas, the risk is that some more hostages will die. Nobody could want that job. Surely it's a desperately difficult job, and I'm surprised that Netanyahu hasn't gone crazy with the stress of leading this kind of nation. And really, anybody who criticizes him, would they want to do a better job? Could they do a better job? I don't think so. So it's a terribly difficult job, and
yes,
anybody with any heart would wish him well in that job.
Okay, Jonathan, let's move on. Let's talk about this activist ship that was stopped by Israeli forces in international waters. 12 activists were on board, including Greta Thunberg and a French member of parliament. The boat was carrying aid, symbolic aid, they say, which included rice and baby food. Jonathan, Israel labels the Madeleine mission as propaganda supporting Hamas, yet activists call it humanitarian. Who decides between protest and threat?
Well, the anti-Israel forces had tried this before. This is not the first ship that's set sail for Gaza. None of the ships have been allowed to land in Gaza, and it is propaganda. And you know, I'm shocked that Greta Thunberg agreed to join this crew. And there were people on this crew. There was a member of the European Parliament. There was somebody who has a record of saying very nasty things about Israel. And it was purely a publicity stunt. And I don't think anybody who wasn't persuaded before about the wrongs of Israel's force in Gaza will be persuaded by this. I think it was just a pointless and expensive publicity stunt. I don't know who funded it. Presumably it was Iran who funded it, but
yes.
The Israel Defense Force quite rightly intercepted the ship. They gave the crew sandwiches, apparently chicken sandwiches. Apparently, reportedly Greta Thunberg, who is supposed to be a vegetarian, relished her chicken sandwich, and they gave them water. And the aid,
right.
the fraction of aid that was on the ship was included in the next aid package to Gaza. There have been 11 million meals sent into Gaza by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Yes.
There have been 12,000 aid trucks in the last 2 weeks. So really, this is the aid on this ship was a drop in the ocean.
Yes.
Compared with the aid that's going into Gaza.
But what the Madeleine has said is that it was a symbolic mission by these 12 activists. Israel, however, Israel Katz, the defense minister in particular, has described it as PR for Hamas. Now, the international community has seen the images coming out of Gaza. It's quite evident there is some sort of a dire humanitarian crisis going on there. What is PR for Hamas about bringing over baby food and rice into no matter how little it is, into a humanitarian crisis?
I think from the evidence that we have, there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There's been no evidence of people starving. When there was peace, there was plenty of aid went into Gaza, enough aid to feed the population. But let's remember that one of the reasons that this new mechanism of aid was set up, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, was that Hamas was stealing the aid that was going in through United Nations and selling it at an inflated price. So, I don't see any evidence of a shortage of food. I don't see any evidence of people starving. I think that this is a myth put around by people in the media who are not on the side of Israel. I don't see any issue there.
Jonathan, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Jonathan Hoffman, thank you very much for your insight. To provide some balance, there are multiple humanitarian foundations that say there is, in fact, a humanitarian crisis occurring in Gaza. Gaza. But thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us. Now we move on to Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron has told world leaders that it is a necessity for nations to impose a moratorium on deep-sea mining while speaking at the 2025 United Nations Ocean Conference. World leaders, scientists and advocates have arrived for the conference today in the southern French city of Nice. The summit is meant to cover climate change, pollution, biodiversity and making humanity's access to marine resources more sustainable. The French president has declared that the deep oceans, Greenland and Antarctica are, quote, not for sale, while UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the deep sea must not turn into the Wild West as nations negotiate contentious new rules for seabed mining. Here's what the UN Secretary General had to say.
Sea cannot become the Wild West. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age of turmoil, but the resolve I see here gives me hope. Hope that we can turn the tide, that we can move from plunder to protection, from exclusion to equity, from short-term exploitation to long-term stewardship.
The conference, which is being held from the 9th to the 13th of June, is co-hosted by France and Costa Rica. Reportedly, one of the stated goals of the French government is to convince enough states to ratify the High Seas Treaty, adopted by the United Nations in 2023, for it to come into effect. Here's what the French president said.
Réchauffe, l'océan, quant à lui, est en ébullition. Nos scientifiques nous disent des faits que nous n'aurions pu imaginer, des canicules au sein même de nos océans. Et comme la mer monte, en plus du feu, c'est la submersion qui nous guette. C'est pourquoi cette mobilisation est une nécessité. Aujourd'hui à Nice, nous avons plus de 120 pays, plus de 50 chefs d'État et de gouvernement, plus de 30 chefs d'État, chefs d'organisations internationales qui ont fait le déplacement. Et ça vient d'être évoqué, 100 000 personnes qui participeront à cette conférence avec des milliers d'événements partout organisés. C'est inédit pour nos océans. C'était essentiel car l'océan nous relie tous au sein d'un seul et même écosystème.
We now move to South America, where Colombian Foreign Minister Laura Sarabia has publicly admitted a failure to protect Colombian after the shocking assassination attempt of Senator Miguel Uribe, a potential 2026 presidential candidate. Let's take a listen to what the Foreign Minister had to say.
Que como líder y representante internacional de este país he fallado. Muchos hemos fallado. En este momento debe ser un llamado a la reflexión, pero sobre todo a la acción. Hemos fallado en la seguridad y la paz para todos los colombianos desde nuestra esquina.
Uribe, a 39-year-old opposition lawmaker from the right-wing Democratic Center Party, remains in intensive care after being shot in the head and leg during a campaign event in a public park in Bogota. His wife confirmed he survived a first surgery, but his doctors say his condition is still critical. An underage suspect was arrested at the scene, and authorities are now investigating whether others were involved. President Gustavo Petro has ordered a full investigation into who may have planned the attack. Let's now move over to the United States, where SpaceX is gearing up for another milestone launch, this time with a truly global crew on board. On Tuesday, June the 10th, a Falcon 9 rocket will blast off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, carrying 4 astronauts to the International Space Station under the Axiom Mission 4. The launch is scheduled for 8:22 a.m. Eastern, with a backup slot available the next day. The mission will mark a return to human spaceflight for India, Poland and Hungary, each sending their first government-sponsored astronaut in over 40 years. It's also the first time all 3 nations will have crew members on the ISS together. The Dragon spacecraft will be making its debut flight, while the Falcon 9 booster has flown once before. After stage separation, the booster will attempt a landing at Cape Canaveral. Over the course of their stay, the crew will carry out more than 60 experiments focusing on human health, Earth monitoring and material sciences. Viewers can watch the launch live 2 hours before the liftoff on SpaceX's X account. Japan has raised concerns after China's aircraft carrier Liaoning sailed through waters east of Iwo Jima Island in the Pacific Ocean for the first time. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi has confirmed the movement and has said that Tokyo would strengthen surveillance and gather necessary information. He also added that Japan has sent what he called an appropriate message to China. Japan's joint staff reported that the Liaoning, accompanied by several other vessels, had sailed within Japan's exclusive economic zone near a remote island off Iwo Jima over the weekend. Japanese officials also confirmed that Chinese fighter jets and helicopters had taken off and landed on the carrier during the operation. In response, China's foreign ministry defended the voyage, saying it was fully in line with international law. The ministry also reiterated that China pursues a defensive defense policy and that urged Japan to view the situation objectively and rationally. We move back to South America now, where Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, is set to appear before the Supreme Court this week, facing explosive charges of attempting a coup to stay in power after losing the 2022 election. In February, prosecutors accused the far-right leader of heading a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results and block the incoming leftist president, Luiz Lula da Silva. The plan failed due to the lack of military support, and Bolsonaro, who's eyeing a 2026 comeback, has denied all charges. He also stands accused of knowing about a plot to assassinate Lula, his vice president, and a Supreme Court judge. Bolsonaro is one of 8 defendants who could face up to 40 years in prison if he's convicted. He's expected to testify on Tuesday or Wednesday. The hearings, broadcast live from the Supreme Court in Brasilia, come just over a year after his supporters stormed that same court. His former aide, Mauro Cid, now a state witness, is key to the case, revealing chats and meetings that shed light on the coup plot. 4 ex-ministers and 2 military chiefs are also on trial. It's a landmark case, the first coup attempt trial in Brazil's democratic history. Let's now move back to the Middle East, where Iran says it will soon deliver a counter-proposal to the United States in ongoing nuclear talks, using Oman as an intermediary. The announcement comes after Tehran rejected a recent US offer, calling it unacceptable. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai confirmed today that the response is being finalized and will be sent shortly through diplomatic channels in Muscat.
به زودی بعد از نهایی شدن از طریق عمان به طرف مقابل ارائه خواهیم کرد و طرحی است که معقول، منطقی و متوازن هست و توصیه می‌کنیم که حتما طرف آمریکایی این فرصت رو قدر بدانه. حتما به نفع آمریکاست که این طرح رو به صورت جدی مطمئن.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.